Welcome to Get Hired. My name is Benjamin Weller and I'm one of the co-founders of Hired, the early career network for students and young professionals. Get Hired is a podcast initiated to unwrap and expose the inside information of the professional world. Stay tuned to gain knowledge from our trusted sources. Yeah, welcome to our new podcast episode. Today we are at Zalando's headquarters here in Berlin, and we have Jeff with us from early careers at Zalando. Thanks.
Awesome. No, thank you for having me. Welcome to the mothership of fashion here in Berlin at our BHQ. So yeah, super excited to have you here today.
It's pretty cool to be here. Thanks a lot for inviting us here.
Yeah, no worries.
So can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am from California originally, but I've been living in Europe since 2008.
Which part of California are you from?
I'm from it's nobody really knows, but it's called Temecula, California. So it's wine country, and it sits between San Diego and LA. So I'm a kind of a SoCal Valley boy here.
Well,
that's what they say.
For European perspective, it looks like, okay, San Diego is basically a suburb of Los Angeles, but it's kind of not, right?
Yeah, it's massive. But I have to say, San Diego is one of the most beautiful cities, and it's a bummer that most people skip it because they'll go direct from Europe into LA, and then they go north from LA, and they miss probably one of the best cities in California.
You have this large naval base, right?
Yeah, so that's actually where Top Gun was filmed, actually, that just came out. So I used to work just right around the corner from Miramar Air Base, where a lot of that was filmed. But yeah, it's a huge naval base. The Navy SEALs trained there. And then there's a huge Marine Corps deployment there called Camp Pendleton. And my dad was in the Marines, and that's why we were in California, because he was stationed in Camp Pendleton.
Very cool. Very cool. And so why did you then leave California? So many people, so in particular like German celebrities, kind of like California, so they moved from Berlin to California. You kind of like did the Heidi Klum inverse. So
it's a funny story. So I started on a graduate program myself with Enterprise Rent-A-Car when I left university. So I was with Enterprise in California, working my way up their grad program. And then, as most Americans do, they have their first European trip where you use all your holidays in 1 year in a 2-week time span, because we don't get many holidays in the States, of course. And I think I was 26, did that trip to Europe, did London, Paris, Venice, Florence, Rome, and back, and just fell in love with London and said, you know what, I want to live here one day. I don't know how, but I'm going to live here. And then I get back, and then Enterprise Rent-A-Car's grad program and everything, it's all internal promotions. And an internal role came open for a role in London at Heathrow Airport as branch manager. So I put my name in the hat for it, not even thinking I would ever get a chance to go or get it, considering, Enterprise being such a large organization. And it came down between me and another person, and she actually got the role and I didn't. So I went on Friday being rejected for the role. And then on Monday, they called me and offered me a different role instead, which was a branch in Aylesbury. And I remember asking myself, Aylesbury, where's that? He's like, it's just North London. Needless to say, it was an hour north of London in the middle of nowhere. And I always had this ongoing joke. I was like, yeah, you know what? California to Aylesbury. They told me there was palm trees, and I fell for it. It went, right? But I moved in November, and it was probably the most challenging and adjustment I've ever had to make. I remember it was a bad winter. It was snowing. I don't know how to drive in the snow from California, slide all over the motorway. And one day at work, I actually got stuck on a motorway. It took me 4 hours to get to work and ended up sliding my car in a ditch. And I remember calling my boss. I'm like, why am I in Aylesbury? Where am I right now? I don't know how to drive in snow. I'm in a company car. I'm like, do you really want me driving this car in the snow? But yeah, I made that move in 2008 to London and worked with Enterprise. And then I ended up in Scotland. So when I was in London, that's when I made the move from rental internally into talent acquisition and recruiting with the universities, because they approached me and said, I think, we think you'd be great for recruiting and recruiting for the grad programs, because I had a great story to tell that I worked my way up. I went from California to London, and we were obviously selling this massive opportunity. So I started doing that, fell in love with it. Then got asked to head up recruitment for Scotland and Northern Ireland. So once again, I was like, all right, this California boy's heading up to Scotland. Never been there before, but, moved up there for 2 years. And at that point is when, I hit that ceiling. I've been with Enterprise for 13 years. and I got headhunted for a role with FDM Group for head of recruitment for UK and Ireland for their grad program. So I moved back down to London, and loved that role. And then, I think everyone in their career at some point gets this tap on the shoulder for a role. And I had a headhunter friend, and he reached out and says, I have this role. And I always said, I'm not looking, but if there's something really cool that comes along, let me know, Exactly. And so I get that tap and I start having conversations, and it was with N26. N26 wanted to build out this early careers future talent program, and also want to build out a tech academy. And how do we find diverse talent and train them ourselves to become software engineers to help bridge that gap? So sold me on the role. I was like, oh, this is really cool. And they're like, oh, by the way, it's in Berlin. I was like, wait, what? I was like, Berlin? I don't speak German. He's like, no, it's okay. You don't need to speak German. I was like, okay. And I loved Germany. I was already at FDM Group managing a team in Frankfurt. So I was in Frankfurt a lot for work. And lo and behold, after, coming over to Berlin, I learned very quickly that Frankfurt is Germany. Berlin, probably not so German as Frankfurt was. So, it was a huge shock, but I made that move. And I think as a lot of people over the last couple of years had a lot of challenges. And, at N26, when Corona hit, I got put on Kurzarbeit and got left in this limbo and not knowing what's going on. And then SumUp reached out to me, said, hey, we want you to do for us what you were doing at N26. So I called N26, like, what's happening? Am I coming back to work soon? Originally, I think everyone thought, oh, we'll only go on Kurzarbeit for just a month, and then we'll be back. It'll be all over. Yeah. 4 months later, still nobody knows what's going on. And my boss, very open, and, Chris Bell, and he's fantastic, and said, you know what, Jeff, I would take the job. And I did. And so I went to SumUp, and then 9 months later got laid off from SumUp, unfortunately. And that's what brought me here to Zalando. So I'm always a firm believer everything happens for a reason, and I'm loving my time here at Zalando. I think it's a fantastic company. I love the culture. I love, the diversity within it. And those are some of the two key things really important to me when I'm looking at, which company do I want to go to. And then the one big, most important thing is that diversity piece. So yeah, long story short, it's been a wild roller coaster. If you've ever been to Disney World, I always say it's like Mr. Toad's Wild Adventure, right? You never know what's going to happen and where your life takes you. But I think, for all those looking at careers, you have to look at the opportunity, not always be fixated on maybe where you're living, but is the role going to give you joy and happiness and excite you for what you do every day?
Yeah, I think it's a very important point you talked about. So this geographic issue around moving from California to the UK. Actually forgot the name of the city.
Ellsbury.
Ellsbury,
yeah.
I honestly never heard about it.
Yeah, me either. Right? I looked on the map. I was like, it looks close to London, but yeah, it was interesting. But I think, for me, I was raised a lot differently. I was, a military kid. My dad, was moving us all over the world. I lived in Hawaii for 3 years. I graduated high school in Okinawa, Japan. So I was always used to just picking up my life. I mean, some places we only lived 10 months and we moved again. So I think that's made me a very eclectic person, very diverse person that, you could throw me in any situation, I'll find my way. And I think that's why I've been so open. So I actually, my parents were like, you live so far away. I was like, well, it's your fault. You dragged me all over the world. So, and I just fell in love with finding and enjoying and living in new places. But having that flexibility has really helped me move my career very quickly. And that's what I appreciate.
How do you think can people adopt this spirit? Because obviously here in Germany and in general in Europe, it's not that common to move around like in the US. Like you find a great job in Arizona and you move from New Jersey to California. Yeah. Or to Arizona in that case, obviously. Yeah. So that's not that common over here in Germany or in Europe. So do you have any idea how one could adopt to this openness to say, well, if there is a great opportunity coming along, I have my friends in my hometown. However, I can of course make good friends in the town I'm going to.
Yeah. I mean, it's a tough one. I think working and living abroad is not for everybody. I've actually met some Americans that moved to Berlin during COVID and lockdown. They came for a job. Tough, right? Yeah. But they left. It didn't last a year. Yeah. And I get it's hard being with family. I think what's interesting is like because even like when we left Japan and I went to University of West Florida, my dad got orders to Anniston, Alabama, which is the middle of nowhere. It's like living in the middle of Germany, not near any cities, right? And I said, I refuse to live in the middle of nowhere. I'm going to the beach down to Florida to go to university. Lo and behold, I was right, because my dad only lasted less than a year in Anniston, Alabama, and then got orders back to California. But at that point, I was already established at university. I loved it. I had friends, so I stayed, and they went to California. So, and even then it was really hard because we didn't have these FaceTiming. Our internet was like Ethernet. You had the dial tones, and then I remember buying for Christmas and mailing a webcam to my parents, and every now and then you get a shot where you could see them, and that was how communication was. But I think now with technology, it's so much easier. Like, for me, I have this Amazon Prime this like little box with a screen, and I bought one for my parents in their kitchen, so I could say, Alexa, drop in to mom in the kitchen, and it'll pop in the screen. And so I'm cooking, dinner, she's cooking breakfast, and we have a chat, and so it's like still being together and stuff. So, but it is not for everyone, and I think. But I've always been a firm believer that you only live once, and I want to live life as full as I can get it. And, being in a military brat and moving all over, I've seen as much of America as I want to see it. So I figured like that chapter is closed. People ask, are you ever going to go back to America? I'm like, no. I think there's so much more I want to see and explore in Europe and elsewhere. So I think do your research, make sure, like, do you connect with that country? Maybe try to connect with some other expats, that you may know or have friends that know, and to speak to them what it's like living in that country to see if it's right for you. But like I moved to Berlin and only have been to Berlin for 24 hours for my interview. Yeah. So I had no idea like what it was like moving. And even when I moved to London, I moved to London with 6 suitcases and an air shipment of 400 pounds. That was my life. I just threw it on the plane and away I went. And I only been to London on holiday for 2 nights, 3 days before I jumped on a train to Paris. So, and then everyone's like, that must be scary. I was like, you know what? I'll meet people. Like, that's just me, right? Like, exactly. It's tough.
And it's probably also like, looking more at the opportunities instead of like what holds you back. So probably I think what most people kind of underestimate is there is always a way back, right? So it's not like, if you don't like it, as you told before about those Americans who came to Berlin during COVID, were probably really tough, not connecting with anyone. So you can also then go back, and I think it's also for many European kids. So there's always the opportunity to come back to your hometown if it didn't like it.
Yeah, just at least try it, right?
Exactly.
Because you hate to go through life and then realize you had an opportunity, you didn't take it up, and the only chance you could go to that city is just on a holiday. But the fact that you could go there and live there and experience it, you can always go back. But how much better does that look for your career on your CV that you've had that international exposure? Because then it really shows that you could work in a multicultural environment, or actually work in any environment, right? So, I highly recommend if you ever have the chance, even if it's for 1-2 years. Even if you could go with your company on maybe a 1-year exchange, I'd always highly recommend doing it.
So how would you compare working in the US, the UK, and Germany? So when I watch, for example, TV in UK or the Americas, it's always like between UK and the US, it's kind of very similar. So Nigel Farage appears on Fox News basically every other week, right? And the exchange between in terms of culture between Europe or let's say Germany and continental Europe and the US and also the UK is of course a bit different. So so how would you compare working and living in those 3 countries?
Yeah, I think I instantly fell in love with working in Europe because I think. In America, like, for me, it was just work, work, work. We didn't get many holidays. Yes, you do 40 hours a week, but you end up doing 60 hours a week. Yeah. And what I appreciate in Europe, particularly in Germany, is that it's very structured. Yeah. The employees are really protected by the law. Like, if you're 40 hours contract, you work 40 hours and you get X amount of holidays. I remember the first year when I moved to Europe, I went and visited the head of HR at Enterprise, just getting a brief of like the different law differences and things that I needed to know as manager. And then she was like, oh, by the way, do we tell you about your holiday? I was like, oh yeah, 2 weeks a year. She's like, no, Jeff, you get 30 days. And I about fell out of my chair. I was like, what do you mean 30 days? I was like, am I being punked here? What's going on? I thought I was like on a hidden camera show or something. He's like, no, Jeff, you got 30 days. I'm like, no. And then I remember my first year, like in December, I get a call from HR. I was like, hey, Jeff, just want to talk to you about your holidays. I was like, oh, yeah, I've had so many amazing holidays this year. She's like, no, Jeff, you still have 6 more days you need to take by the end of the year. I'm like, are you sure? I took a lot of holidays. Did you count right? He's like, Jeff, you have 6 more days to take. He's like, oh, all right. So last minute, took 6 days off and then went traveling around the UK for a little bit. So, I think that culture, that work-life balance really exists, I think, in Europe and particularly in Germany versus in America. I didn't really, I think, get that. Yeah. So I like it much more here.
So that's something I also find very interesting when living in the US. So compared to Europe, I wouldn't say that Europeans are lazy, not at all, of course, but like Americans work actually a lot, right? So also on the weekends, so even if you have an office job, you actually do a lot of work on the weekends, and that can of course also be quite tiring, right?
Yeah, it is very tiring. I remember doing a lot of work on the weekends and stuff, but I don't know, I've heard a couple stories of like differences. I don't necessarily think this pertains to me, but I think some people in America will work extremely hard because it's really easy to fire somebody. If you're my boss and I showed up late for the 3rd day in a row, or I've ticked you off that day, you can just say, you know what, you're fired, get out of here. And there's like no repercussions, just on the day you're fired. But like in Germany, and in Europe in general, it's really hard to dismiss somebody from their job. Mm-hmm. So I think people go above and beyond and work extra hard and always want to be seen working really hard so they're not at risk. And I heard there's other countries that are similar to that kind of culture, and not necessarily fear, but I think it's something I think you don't want to get your head around. You just want to go in and do your job and do it well, and not have to do it to impress them because you're afraid you get fired one day or something.
So you talked about diversity here at Zalando, and maybe that actually kind of gets us there where we just talked about. So like this culture of fear, so is nowadays kind of replaced with a culture of empowerment, with a culture of diversity, with a culture of encouragement. How has it also changed in the US? And then maybe we can talk a bit about how this actually works at Zalando. So what impressed you in terms of diversity?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the States, and we've seen a lot of what's going on in America, and I think there's still a long journey that they need to take when it comes to diversity. But what I've seen here in Zalando, and the diversity here is amazing. I feel comfortable working here. I love everyone being so different, but we have this thing of come as you are, be as you are type of mentality, like and that's what I love. I think there's so many different diversity ERGs. Everyone's really open to a lot of the diversity initiatives that I've launched. For example, we have our Annan initiative, which we're a huge sponsor of, with the organization called Annan, ADAN. And it's an organization that's supporting people of color that have migrated here to Germany, and those type of initiatives, Zalando is so supportive and really wanting to bring this type of diversity into the organization. And that's what I love. And I think you see that. I always tell students when I go and speak to them on campus that if you really want to know what the diversity and the power of diversity really is at Zalando, just go on YouTube and watch any of our Zalando campaigns, because every group is always represented in those campaigns. And every time I watch them, it just, I got a smile from ear to ear, because it just makes me proud working for that organization when you see that kind of diversity. And I haven't seen that in any other organization, particularly in ad campaigns. I think Zalando really pushes, that envelope when it comes to diversity.
Yeah, for me, diversity is also like everyone feels comfortable working there. So therefore, as we talked about culture of fear before, I think it's actually kind of the worst culture you can possibly have. So when people come in the morning, are frightened about their bosses and are not like empowered to be who they are. So how could they potentially be good employees in terms of good output? So that is also kind of, I think the topic of diversity is kind of selfish from both sides, right? So it helps both sides. So employer and employee, of course.
And it just really helps, an organization get the best out of their people. If somebody's that comfortable being who they are, you see the best version of themselves in the workplace. And actually, drives that fun and energy and culture that you want in an organization. Because I've seen, in other organizations, not necessarily ones I've worked with, but I've seen in other organizations where a culture could just be toxic, and that's not a fun environment. And, when I am applying for jobs or I get headhunted for a job, the first thing I look at is I go and maybe look at Glassdoor, or I look at what reviews to kind of get an idea of what is the culture like in that organization. And I did the same thing with Zalando. The first thing I actually went on YouTube to see the videos, and I was like, oh wow, this is interesting. It's like, is the diversity really like that at Zalando? And then I did a little bit more digging and realized actually it really is a diverse culture, and having some friends that have worked here, can vouch for that as well. I think there's an ongoing joke: if you throw a rock in Berlin, the odds are you're going to hit somebody from Zalando, because there's so many of us here. So always somebody has a friend of a friend of a friend, or somebody that works at Zalando. So it's really easy to kind of reach out and pick somebody's brain about the culture and what it is actually working here at Zalando.
Working at Zalando, I think Zalando is a very interesting company in terms of everyone knows you, everyone uses your products. I think in particular those who listen and watch us, well, I think literally everyone. But what can I actually do at Zalando? So yes, so you have so many touch points with Zalando, but I actually have no idea other than you. I haven't met that many people from Zalando. So what can I do at Zalando?
Yeah, I mean, we have so many different departments and areas across Zalando.
And I'm so curious to find out.
Yeah, I mean, it's even me. Like, I've been at Zalando. I just had my 1-year anniversary in July, and there's still areas of the business that I haven't probably learned yet. But I think there's some really cool, interesting things about Zalando, because Zalando has a couple different entities. So, for example, for us in early careers, we work a lot with Zalando Marketing Services, which is a separate entity to Zalando. And actually, they're a huge advocate for us in early careers. We've hired a lot of interns for them, and they've converted a lot of interns to full-time. And it's really cool to see what they do, working very closely with the brands, building out some marketing campaigns to position the products in front of the right people, looking at a lot of that data analytics. Where's the, how can we position a product where, we can get the biggest return for the partners. And so I think what they do is super interesting. But we are a tech company. A lot of people say, oh, Zalando, it's fashion. But at the end of the day, we're tech, and in all that thing, everything that you do on our app can't be done without the amazing technical teams that we have supporting behind it, giving the users a fun shopping experience. They're not going into a store, but guess what? You can still have fun shopping online and actually really enjoy it, and really making that experience pleasurable. Because I feel like, as an ongoing joke, when I speak to students, and I speak to thousands of students every year, I always say, I feel like I'm Zalando's target customer, because I'm a big American guy. I hate shopping online because I have to try on everything. And I'm like, I always had to return things when I shopped online because nothing fit. I want to go into a store, make sure it fits, and then I'll buy it. And then coming to Zalando, and the first time I bought something, it fit. I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I bought something else and it fit. And because of the technology behind the platform and the size and fit, and the recommendations of, based on your past purchases and your returns, we recommend you buy this size. It's so intuitive that it actually gets it right. For me, being a bigger guy, it makes a world of a difference. So, there's so much that goes on in Zalando, working with our partners, our customer care centers, our logistics. There's so many different areas across Zalando, and a lot of opportunities as well. So, you go on our website and our career site, you can see all those different opportunities that are spread across the Zalando businesses.
Yeah, I find this incredibly interesting in terms of you connect something that is like highly emotional. So I know so many people whose like favorite hobby is, I'm gonna spend I've done a lot of work today, so I spent like half an hour on Zalando webpage, and that's kind of their hobby. And so you connect something like a feeling or great emotions with great technology. So that's actually quite a remarkable achievement.
Yeah. I mean, I actually, I was already a Zalando customer before I joined Zalando, as many people are. And actually I think Zalando is probably the one website I've only bought clothes off of. Because I was never comfortable, even in the UK, we have some competitors there. I never shopped on their websites. I didn't trust it. And then I come to Berlin, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. And maybe lockdown forced a little bit of that, right? Because you had to shop online. But, when I got introduced to Zalando, I was like, wow, this is actually really cool. This is fun. And, and then, okay, I bought something and it was super fast and it fit. I was like, oh, this is cool. That's never happened before. So it's definitely, I was definitely a solid customer before joining Zalando.
And how is it at Zalando when you look at those trends? So as you said, so for example, during lockdown, you had to shop online, but on the other hand, of course, people went out less, so therefore they probably were not that interested in getting so much stuff every week or so.
Yeah.
And now that everything has reopened and hopefully stays open, so that people are super hungry first to go out, but also to sometimes also shop offline. Well, not me. I really hate shopping offline.
Yeah.
So, but there are those people who are then going to the large department stores now. So how does Zalando manage those large trends?
Well, I mean, you think about like Zalando always had a strong customer base, right? So, even before the pandemic, we still had a large customers that were still shopping online. And I think that's what really helped Zalando during the pandemic because, we already were getting it right before a pandemic. And the pandemic just obviously enhanced that and made it better. But, I think, we always find ways to make adjustments in the business. And I think Zalando is very forward thinking in that way. And in a way, almost trying to predict those trends so we could, so that we could be proactive versus reactive. And I'm seeing that now in the organization, and I've seen it in other organizations as well. And I think, for graduates out there looking for jobs, I think these are the kind of important things to really look for an employer, do some research to get some understandings, to make sure it's the right company for you, but also the company you're joining is strong, it's stable. They're very, proactive in everything that they're doing versus, we've seen recently across Berlin, lots of layoffs because of everything that's going on. And I think those are just companies that are just being very reactive because they didn't forward plan, they didn't think or plan for that kind of situation. And easy for them just to hit that panic button and hit a release, right? And I think that's super important. And what's great about working at Zalando, we try as much as possible to not predict the future, but we try to, be proactive in different situations.
At Zalando, do you also then have like a development plan for every individual so that you can make sure you can grow organically, however then coached and guided by others?
Yeah, so with our early career programs that we have, we call them Future Zalants.
Zalants
with a Z.
I love that.
Right? We like to put some Z's on things. But, we have this saying in our department is learn with us, grow with us, right? So come in, you seize the opportunity you have in your internship to learn as much as possible. We have an amazing L&D team here at Zalando, and we've highlighted a lot of different courses that our Zalants can sign up and take as part of Zalando when it comes to like time management and growth mindset and all these things that really help that Zalants go from university, that transition from university to work, because it's different. There's some students that come in there with that mindset of still being in uni and they haven't quite transitioned to now it's work, and we really try to give them all the tools needed to help them make that transition. So when I joined a year ago, really just kind of started really building out the early career programs here. And that was one of the key things we really wanted to align. And we're still doing some work, and we still got a lot of work to do when it comes to that development, because we want to kind of give it to them on a silver platter to help with their conversion, right? If you have an intern or a working student comes in, does a fantastic job, works at the best, they have a higher probability of getting a full-time contract at the end. So we want to give the tools necessary to really allow them to show their true best selves in their performance.
So when you hire people, so what are the things you're looking after? So in the US, obviously, like big tech is like incredibly selective, looking only at the Ivy League schools. So how does Zalando approach this?
Yeah, so we don't look at the Ivy League schools. I say we participate and we support all universities. I know there are some organizations, and I've seen it in the past, and that were like, we want to go to the top universities for the top degree programs to get the best of the best students. Well, guess what? You're not going to get a whole lot of diversity with that either.
Exactly.
Particularly when you look at those under like that fall under social mobility. Like for me, I was first in the family to go to university. I didn't go to a top grade university. University of West Florida was like a very kind of slightly low middle tier university, but it was cheap. It was close to Alabama. My parents didn't have a lot of money, and I didn't have scholarships. I had to pay for university myself. And as you know, in America, university is quite expensive compared to being in Europe. Yeah, a little expensive. So, for me, like, we try to target universities who produce students that align with Zalando. We try to work with universities that have the best diversity makeup. Students pick universities for many different reasons. It's not just because it's the best of the best university. It's because it's close to home. It's cheaper. People still have family obligations. And I think for us in the graduate recruitment market, and particularly for our team, it is our responsibility to go out there and find the talent. So you could go to any university, you could still find amazing people at that university. And I think because of that, it's really helped reinforce that diversity coming into Zalando from the very entry level stage. So yes, we work with some top tier universities, but yeah, we work with universities that, are a little bit lower on the table as well. And I think that's important. And I would, any employers listening to this, I would highly recommend that. Don't just build a campaign that's only targeting top universities, because it's not going to help drive sometimes the right culture or diversity within your organization.
And so when you then talk to young talents, so what are the key qualities you're looking after?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, when we're looking at interns or a working student, we understand that you're not going to have a whole lot of experience yet. But what we do look for is those transferables. So what experience have you gained that is transferable to the job? But then also, like, what other extracurriculars have you done? How are you making best use of your time at university? I love hiring people that are super active on campus. They're part of this organization, this club. They do this sports team. They really have integrated themselves, not just in the studying, but they do a lot, because it already shows signs of maybe leadership and work ethic and being able to work with different cultures or a lot of different people. They show that they're a team player. There's all these really great transferable soft skills, critical skills that they develop by doing that can really support them in their roles. So, we're not necessarily looking for a world of experience, but maybe a little bit of experience, but never, underestimate the experience you've gained at university. Because I've had students say, Jeff, I really want to work for Zalando, but I don't have much experience. I'm like, well, what have you done? They're like, well, I work at a cafe. I was like, well, why do you feel that working at a cafe is not worthy enough of experience for Zalando? Well, I don't know. It's just a cafe. I was like, but time management, your work ethic, there's all these things that you've gained that's important to me. And they always undervalue those type of roles. So I think, really bring all of that out in the interview.
I'm really great to say that, because that's also what I've been telling students all the time. Well, if you worked at McDonald's, if you worked in Rewe, wherever, put this on your CV, because it says so much about your personality that you are able to show up for work, which is, it's perhaps not as cool as working for big fancy company to put stuff on the shelves, but it's like super important, and you probably learn so many qualities there that others don't have. And I also discover that quite often when we have people applying for jobs at Hyatt also, that it just worked at McDonald's. Yeah, but that's great.
Yeah, never say just here. Like, it's all a great experience. Like, I tell students, like, listen, if you don't have literally any work experience, you haven't been in clubs or worked in a coffee shop, then I really hope you're getting straight A's. Because what else are you doing at university? For me, like, I didn't have the best grades in the world. I had to work 3 jobs to put myself through university. And this is where the system, I think, is really broken, particularly in America, because I kept getting passed up for graduate jobs because I didn't have a certain GPA. Now, because I didn't have that GPA didn't mean I was a bad person. It's just I was working 3 jobs. Like, I was a resident advisor, I worked in student activities, and then on the weekends I was a bouncer at a nightclub, working from 9 p.m. to 4 a.m. It was hard for me to find time to study. And then when I wasn't working, I was just exhausted and tired, right? So, my grades were very average at university. But because of that, I got passed up, which I think is why I ended up being so loyal to Enterprise, because Enterprise wasn't so fixated on the GPA. They're looking at the bigger picture, like, okay, his GPA is not the highest, but look how many jobs he was doing at university. Obviously, there's a reason for that, right? So it's really, really interesting to see the different approaches on employers. If they're fixated on grades, or they fixated on this, or they want only a top university. If you go to a top key university, then it's going to be a lot of scholarships that probably got them there, coming from maybe a privileged or higher end background. But when you're first in the family to go to university, and the family didn't make a lot of money, where I had to take out a lot of loans to pay for it. And it took me 5 years to get through university. So yeah, it was a lot harder for me.
Well, to be fair, I have no idea how social mobility should work if you want people to be in the top business schools that are super expensive, have top grades, and have internships that are probably not always paid. How is that possible?
Yeah.
Right? So it's like to be honest, I think it's a kind of a myth.
Yeah.
And therefore, it's really great that you appreciate people doing jobs that most of students don't consider like super valuable. But I totally agree. It's like incredible experience you collect there.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Jeff. So I think we learned a lot. It was amazing to be here at Zalando. Is there anything else you would want our listeners or viewers to know about Zalando, how great of a career you can have here, and how it is working with you then in the end?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thanks for having me. I think, the last piece of advice I'd give to graduates out there in the market right now is that we understand and know that we're entering very challenging times. There's words of a recession. And when these kind of things happen, and I've seen in the past, back when you look in 2008, students begin to panic. They're thinking, I'm not going to get a job when I graduate. They hit that panic button, and then it creates what we call spam applying, where students will just start applying anywhere and everywhere without thinking about, is this the right company for me? Is it the right even role for me? And I think the best advice is don't panic, think it through. Still do your research to make sure you're applying to the right roles, and actually spend a lot of time, learning about that company, tailoring your CV. And I think if you put a lot of focus on it, you'll still get a role. So I think the important thing is don't panic, utilize your network, go to your career services, because they work very closely with a lot of employers. They can maybe help open that door for you so that you can get an interview. But I think the main thing is don't panic. Even if you're already working as an intern within an organization and things might be difficult for them, again, still don't panic. Think about, still giving it 110%. Doing and delivering the best version of yourself and the work that you do, and really everything you do, put your name on it. Build your personal brand and put your stamp on everything that you do. But I think the main thing is don't panic. Things will get better. You'll find the right role, and I think if you dedicate yourself in the right way, you'll get there.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. That was very insightful indeed. And we connect the Zalando career community below the video. So if you have any questions to Jeff, you can reach out to him.
Absolutely.
Thanks a lot, Jeff.
Awesome.
It was amazing being here.
Yeah, thank you so much.